Welcome back everyone, it is Eric from Rare Candy, and today we're going to be updating Lugia VSTAR for the brand new Paradox Rift format. Now, even though the new Iron Hands EX is a card that Lugia might have to be a little bit afraid of, it's also a card that the deck can make use of for its own purposes too. So that's going to be the big new addition to the deck, but we also do have a few other new cards that are going to be working their way into this list. But before we actually get into this deck profile today, just a heads up guys, if you need any Paradox Rift cards for yourself, friends of the channel over at flipsidegaming.com are still taking pre-orders on sealed product. Just use coupon code RARECANDY at checkout for a discount, and you'll get free shipping too. But if Flipside is out of stock by the time you find this video, you can also use my affiliate link with TCGPlayer, where they'll show you all of the next cheapest online listings. Links to those will be down below in the description. So to kick things off, we have a 4-3 Lugia VSTAR evolution line. But of course, the thing that makes this entire archetype work is going to be that Summoning Star VSTAR power that lets us get 2 non-rulebox colorless Pokemon from our discard pile and put them onto our bench. And Tempest Dive is still a decent attack right now, does 220, and we discard a Stadium from play, which does work out really well because we have a lot of basic Pokemon V and EX running around that this attack can one-shot. And of course, the other key component of the deck is going to be the Archeops with the Primal Turbo ability. So once we use Lugia's VSTAR power to get this thing in play, we can use that to be able to accelerate 2 special energies from our deck to our Pokemon. Drapion V and its Wild Style ability is going to help us out against Mew V Max since we don't really have a good way at one-shotting it otherwise. But against other Dark Weak Pokemon like Gardevoir EX, we can still just power it up manually with our Archeops. And Wyrdeer is here to give our deck a big one-shotting option, which this version of Lugia does lack a little bit compared to the single strike version. Whenever we move from the bench to the active spot, we take any of our energy in play and move it to Wyrdeer. And then the Psyshield Dash attack does 40 damage times the amount of energy attached to this thing. So between this ability and our Archeops to power this thing up, Wyrdeer V is going to be blowing away pretty much anything that gets in its path. We're also playing a copy of Mute EX, which serves a few different purposes. It has the Restart ability, which will let us draw until we have 3 cards in hand, which in turn is going to help Iono-proof our deck a little bit more in the late game, but also is a great attacker with that genome hacking attack that copies one of our opponent's attacks on their active Pokemon. So that means we can copy things like Lost Impact on Giratina VSTAR, Moonlight Shuriken on Radiant Greninja, etc. But of course, the big new addition to the deck is the Iron Hands EX. Its first attack isn't anything too special, we're actually rarely, if ever, going to be able to use it. We're hopefully going to be using this second attack that does 120 and allows us to take an extra prize card if our opponent was knocked out by this attack. So this means we'll be able to take multi-prize KOs on things like Radiant Greninja, on Kirlias, on Sableye, and it really feels like if your opponent can't respond to this card on the turn that you play it, you're probably just going to steamroll them at that point. We have 2 copies of Snorlax as the deck's 1 prize attacker. Snorlax's ability is already pretty great by preventing things like Star Requiem or Lost Mine from Sableye, but another thing I do like about this card is the fact that if we don't get the turn 2 Archeops, we can actually just power up Snorlax over the course of a couple turns. Now obviously we're going to try to get Archeops out, but it's nice to have the extra option with Snorlax. And our last single prize Pokemon is going to be a copy of Pumpkaboo for that Pumpkin Pit ability that allows us to discard a Stadium card from play whenever we bench it from hand. And to round out our Pokemon, we have 2 copies of Lumineon V to be able to search out supporters out of our deck. Getting into our trainer cards, we have 4 copies of Boss's Orders, which allows us of course to switch one of our opponent's bench Pokemon with their active. This does seem like a high count of the card, but this card gains even more value now that we have Iron Hands, because we can't always knock out our opponent's active with Iron Hands, so we might have to boss around their active a little bit more than we're used to. We have 3 copies of Professor's Research to discard our hand and draw 7. And of course is one of the main ways we can get those Archeops into the discard pile, along with 2 copies of Iono to disrupt our opponent's hand size and also for those turns where we don't want to discard what we have in ours. And our final supporter card is 1 copy of Professor Burnett to be able to search out 2 cards from our deck and immediately discard them. So ideally we just grab Burnett off of our Lumineons, then discard our Archeops and get going with our deck. For our first Stadium of the deck, we have 2 copies of Mesagoza. We're still playing this card. It definitely feels like a bit of a necessary evil, since you do have to flip heads if you do want to get a Pokemon out of your deck. But we also do have 1 copy of Collapse Stadium to force both players down to just 4 Pokemon on their bench. We do have quite a few different bench sitters in this deck with the Lumineons, the Pumpkaboo, sometimes previously damaged Pokemon. So Collapse is both a disruption card for our opponent and also kind of acts as a way to deny prizes too. We have 4 copies of Ultra Ball, definitely the best Pokemon search card for the deck. Obviously, we can grab anything that we want, but it serves as one of the ways we can get our Archeops in the discard pile. We also are still playing 4 copies of Capturing Aroma, another card that certainly feels like a bit of a necessary evil, since it is a flip-based card where if we get heads, we get an evolution from our deck, if tails, we get a basic. And then from there, 2 copies of Nest Ball to be able to grab a basic Pokemon and put it on our bench. But the other big new addition the deck has received is Earthen Vessel. We discard a card from our hand and then search our deck for 2 basic energies and put them into our hand. Unfortunately, we do have to run some basic energies to cover the lightning attack cost on Iron Hands, but this card not only gives us more outs to finding those energies on the turns that we want them, but also now gives us another way to discard cards from our hand, which is so important in the early game to be able to get our Archeops in the discard pile. But from there, let's get into our energy. We have 4 copies of Double Turbo Energy. Self-explanatory there, most of our Pokemon can use colorless energy to attack. From there, we have 4 copies of Jet Energy. This allows us to switch the Pokemon we attach it to into the active spot. We do have a lot of Pokemon with high retreat costs in this deck, so this gives us another way to move them in and out of the active spot without actually having to lose our energy in play. But also, since Snorlax does put itself to sleep, we can also use Jet Energy to get around that, or also to make use of Weird Ear V's ability. We have 2 copies of Gift Energy to allow us to draw up to 7 cards in our hand whenever the Pokemon it's attached to gets knocked out by damage. So between these and our Mute EX, it's going to be a little bit tricky for our opponent to successfully stick us with a late game Iono. Next up, we have 2 copies of V-Guard Energy, which despite Pokemon V being on the decline, is still a really important card for a variety of matchups. If we go against Giratina VSTAR, we can put this on our Lugias to make sure Lost Impact actually can't knock us out, or if we're going against a Lost Box deck, we can slap one of these down on our Iron Hands to make sure that Dragonite V can't return KO our Iron Hands. And our last special energy of the deck is 1 copy of Therapeutic Energy, which prevents the card it's attached to from being asleep, confused, or paralyzed. Most of the time, we're just using this on Snorlax to make sure it doesn't put itself to sleep, but if you do run against someone playing something cancerous like the Venomoth deck, it also is still pretty good against stuff like that too. But again, more so for Snorlax. And then from there, 2 basic lightning energies to round out our deck list. So even though we can't search these out with Archeops, between the 2 physical energies and the 2 earthen vessels, we actually have pretty decent odds of being able to draw into them whenever the turn comes that we might want to use our Iron Hands. So that's going to be my updated Lugia VSTAR deck list. I do think this list is a pretty solid starting point for anyone who's thinking about integrating Iron Hands into their Lugia builds. But with that being said, I do want to hear from you guys down below in the comments section. What do you guys think of this list? Do you think Lugia even needs Iron Hands EX? Let me know your full thoughts down below. But if you did enjoy today's content, as always, remember to leave a like on the video. And if you're feeling a little extra generous, you can also become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg or pick up some merch at rarecandytcg.com. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.